I need you to picture a room. It is a Saturday evening in October in Atlanta, and the room is one of the most beautiful event spaces I have ever walked through in my professional life, which is saying something because I have walked through hundreds. The Whitmore Grand does what only a handful of venues in this city actually manage to do. It makes you feel like the occasion is worthy of you, not the other way around. The ceilings are 22 feet. The lighting is the kind that costs more per hour than most people's monthly car payments. There are flowers on every surface, white and blush and deep burgundy. Arrangements I could price to the dollar because I have ordered flowers like them for clients whose names you would recognize. Every detail of this room says, someone who cares about excellence put this together. I am standing just inside the entrance to the reception hall, holding a glass of water I picked up from a passing tray because I needed something to do with my hands. I am wearing a deep green dress that I bought 4 months ago for a reason I could not have explained at the time. My hair is up. My shoes are the right shoes. I am, by any external measure, a woman who belongs in this room. My father is standing 20 feet away at the entrance to the VIP section, which is a roped-off cluster of round tables nearest the bridal party, and he is looking at me with the particular expression I have spent 34 years learning to read. It is not anger. Raymond Dupree does not get angry in public. In public, he smiles, he shakes hands, he tells people how wonderful everything is. What he does in public when he wants to communicate something unpleasant is he smirks. Just a small pull at the corner of his mouth, barely enough to call a smile, but carrying everything he wants to say without the risk of anyone overhearing it. He said 4 words to me. I want you to hear them the way I heard them, standing there with my glass of water, in a room full of people who were watching without looking like they were watching. VIP tables are family. He did not say family only. He did not bother with the only. He just said VIP tables are family. And then he gestured, lightly, with 2 fingers toward the general seating. The way you gesture at a dog. The way you wave off something that doesn't quite belong. The room did what rooms do in that moment. It held its breath. And then Victor Chase, who was the general manager of the Whitmore Grand and was coming down the hall toward us from the direction of the event office, stopped walking. He looked at my father, and then he turned to me. What I need to tell you, before I tell you what Victor said, is everything that happened before this moment, because the smirk did not come from nowhere. The smirk has a history. And the history is why what happened next meant exactly as much as it meant. Not one thing more and not one thing less. I am Celeste Monroe. I have been in the event and hospitality business for 6 years, and I have been my father's inconvenient secret for 34. I own 2 event companies, 1 partnership stake in a catering operation in Buckhead, and as of 3 weeks after this wedding, a partial acquisition in a property that I will tell you about in a moment, because the property matters. I want to be precise with you about something. I did not go to my half-sister's wedding to make a point. I went because Janelle invited me, and because for once in my adult life, I decided I was not going to make myself smaller to accommodate the comfort of people who have never once returned the favor. I went in a deep green dress with my head up and my paperwork in order, and I walked into the most beautiful room in Atlanta and stood there holding a glass of water while my father gestured me toward the back. And then Victor Chase turned around. Let me tell you what happened. I am going to tell you about my father, and I am going to do it without making it into something it wasn't. Raymond Dupree is a good-looking man. I say this because it matters in a way I didn't understand until I was an adult. People who are good-looking and charming have a kind of cover that the rest of us don't. They move through rooms and people assume the best of them. They make decisions that cost other people, and the cost doesn't always show up on their face. Raymond has the kind of face that makes people feel like they're being let in on something when he smiles at them. I have seen it work on strangers in under a minute. My mother's name is Lorraine. She was 24 when she met Raymond, 26 when she had me. and 28 when he married Patricia. I want you to hold that timeline, because the marriage to Patricia happened while my mother was still hoping things might go differently. She did not tell me that. I figured it out later, from things she said and did not say, from the way she went very quiet sometimes when his name came up, and very busy the rest of the time. I saw Raymond every other weekend until I was 12, and then every other weekend became once a month, and once a month became the occasional holiday, and the occasional holiday became a birthday card that arrived 2 days late, and a check that stopped coming when I turned 18, because he told my mother I was an adult now and adults supported themselves. I was a freshman in college. His house was 40 minutes from ours. I could have walked there if I tried. What I want you to understand is that the distance between 40 minutes and the moon is not geographic. Patricia was polite to me the way a woman is polite to a situation she has decided to manage rather than acknowledge. She never said anything mean. She never raised her voice. She offered me lemonade and kept my visits to the kitchen table and made sure I understood, through every surface she had carefully arranged and every photo on every wall that did not include me, that I was a visitor in that house. A visitor with a biological claim, yes, but a visitor. Janelle was 6 years younger than me and grew up not knowing quite what I was. We were not unfriendly. We were strangers who shared a man neither of us fully had. At Christmas, when I was 10 and she was 4, she showed me her new toys with the open-handed generosity of a child who has been given everything and does not yet know that not everyone has been given the same. I did not begrudge her. She didn't choose any of it. She was 4 years old, and she had a stuffed elephant, and she wanted to show me. I am telling you this not because it is a story of suffering. I had a mother who worked hard and loved clearly, and I had enough, and I was fine in all the ways that matter. What I am telling you is what I built in response to what was absent, because that is the part that turns out to be relevant. When you grow up as someone's inconvenient detail, you learn to make yourself legible in other ways. You learn to build credentials. You learn to show up early and prepared and dressed right and not need anything from the room you walk into, because needing things from rooms has historically not gone well for you. You learn that your name in your own mouth sounds different than your name in someone else's mouth, and you learn to prefer your own pronunciation. Raymond Dupree built a successful landscaping business in Marietta and a family that looked right in photographs and a life that worked for him. That is real. That is what he built. What I built is something else, and I will get to it. But first I need you to understand what the smirk cost me the first 100 times I saw it, so you can understand why it cost me nothing on the 101st. You need to understand what I mean when I say I am in the event business, because people hear that and they think I set up chairs and order centerpieces. That is not what I do. I founded Monroe Event Group when I was 28, 6 years ago, after 4 years of working for one of the top hospitality firms in Atlanta, and 1 year of working for myself out of a home office with a laptop and a contact list I had been building since college. Monroe Event Group does high-end corporate events and private celebrations for clients who want the thing done exactly right and do not want to manage the process themselves. We have a team of 11. Our events have been covered in 3 regional publications and 1 national one. I have worked with venues across Atlanta, and the relationships I have built in this industry are not decorative. They are functional. They are the reason things get done. The second company, Monroe Hospitality Partners, I started 2 years ago. This is the arm of my work that is moving into ownership and partnership stakes. I believe in owning the room, not just running the event in it. That is a thing I say to people who ask me about my business philosophy, and it is true, but it is also a thing that goes deeper than philosophy. I have spent my whole life being told, in one way or another, that certain rooms are not for me. That has made me very interested in holding the deed. 3 months before Janelle's wedding, I entered into negotiations for a partial acquisition of the Harlow Event Center in Midtown, which is the sister property to the Whitmore Grand. The Harlow and the Whitmore are owned by the same parent company, Prestige Venue Group, and the Whitmore's general manager, Victor Chase, was one of the people I had been working with through the negotiation process. Not because he ran the property I was acquiring, but because his company's leadership had asked him to serve as a point of contact during due diligence. He knew who I was. He had known who I was for 4 months before the wedding. I want to be precise about what I am not saying. I am not saying I planned for any of what happened at the reception. I did not know Victor would be in that hallway at that moment. I did not orchestrate the timing. What I am saying is that I had done the work for years, and the work had built things I couldn't always see clearly until something put them in the light. My attorney, Beverly Okafor, called me on a Thursday afternoon, 10 days before Janelle's wedding, to tell me the acquisition paperwork was in its final stage, and we would be ready to sign within a month. I remember I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a fabric vendor in Buckhead, going over swatches for a client's December event, and I took Beverly's call and listened to her lay out the timeline, and when I hung up, I sat for a moment in that car with the swatches on my lap, and I thought about the conversation I had when I was 22 and told my father I wanted to go into hospitality, and he looked at me with something that was not quite the smirk, but was related to it, a kind of patient tolerance, and said, "Celeste, that's a hard business." I sat in that car and I thought, yes, it is. Then I drove to my next appointment. What I am going to tell you is what the wedding day looked like and what happened inside it. But first I want you to understand this. I walked into the Whitmore Grand on a Saturday evening in October as a woman who had spent 6 years building something real, who had a partial acquisition in process with the parent company of the building she was standing in, and who was wearing a deep green dress because green is a color that says I am here without having to announce it. I was not there to prove anything. I was just there, and that turned out to be enough. The invitation came in the mail on a Wednesday in August, and I stood at my kitchen counter holding it for a while before I put it down. It was a nice invitation, thick cardstock, deep gold lettering, the kind of thing that tells you someone made real decisions about the details. Janelle Dupree and Derek Osai request the honor of your presence. The venue was listed as the Whitmore Grand, and I looked at that line twice, the second time with a small, private feeling I didn't immediately name. Nadira was at my kitchen table with her laptop when I brought the invitation in. She looked at it over the rim of her coffee cup and said, "Are you going?" I said I hadn't decided. She put the cup down. Nadira Cole does not tell you what to do. She is too smart for that, and she has known me long enough to know that telling me what to do produces exactly the opposite of the intended result. What she does instead is ask questions that contain the answer without making the answer feel like a lecture. She said, "What happens if you go?" I thought about it. I said, "I sit in the back. I watch my half-sister get married. I eat the dinner. I come home." She said, "And if you don't go?" I said, "I stay home. I order Thai food. I wonder for the next 3 years whether I made the right call." Nadira said, "The Thai food in this neighborhood has been going downhill." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed about any of this. Here is what I knew before I made the decision. I knew that Raymond would be there, and that Raymond would manage me the way he always managed me, with the particular brand of careful minimizing that he had perfected over decades. I knew Patricia would be present and correct and distant in the way she had always been present and correct and distant. I knew that I would be the only guest at that wedding who was not entirely sure what category she belonged in. I also knew that Janelle had sent the invitation herself, not through Raymond, not through Patricia. She had addressed it to Celeste Monroe, with my correct last name, which is my mother's name, not his. She had used a handwritten note on the inside of the envelope that said only, "I would really like you to be there." No explanation, no apology for any of it, just that one sentence. I thought about Janelle at 4 years old with her stuffed elephant. I thought about the fact that she was 28 years old now and getting married, and had written my name on an envelope by hand and put it in the mail. I called Nadira back that evening and said I was going. She said, "I know." I said, "Did you already know the whole time?" She said, "I knew when you described the invitation for 4 minutes instead of putting it down after 2 sentences." There was one thing I did not tell Nadira then. I did not tell her about the Whitmore Grand, or Victor Chase, or the Harlow acquisition, or any of the professional context that made this particular venue this particular thing. I kept that to myself. Not because I was planning anything, but because some things you hold privately until the moment requires you to show them. I RSVP'd the following day. 1 seat, no meal preference noted, because I knew enough about events to know that noting a meal preference is not necessary when you have the relationships to make adjustments day of. I put the invitation on my refrigerator. I bought the green dress 2 weeks later. I want to tell you what it is like to walk into a venue you know professionally when you are attending it personally, because it is a particular kind of double vision that is hard to explain. I have been inside the Whitmore Grand 7 times for professional reasons. I have walked its hallways during setup calls and vendor walkthroughs, and twice for site assessments I was doing for clients who were considering it for their own events. I know where the service entrance is. I know that the north side of the main hall has a sound issue near the third speaker cluster that their audio team has been aware of since last year. I know that the catering kitchen runs 16 feet longer than the floor plan suggests, which is a detail that matters for staffing logistics. I know this building the way a doctor knows a hospital, not as a guest, but as someone who understands how the infrastructure works. Walking into it in a green dress at 4:30 in the afternoon, with a ceremony starting at 5, was something else. The lobby was already full. I estimated 140 guests, which matched the scale of the arrangements I had clocked from the invitation and the venue's typical capacity for an event this size. The flowers in the entrance were exceptional. I noted the vendor from the style of the arrangements and was not surprised it was someone good. Janelle, or whoever was helping her plan this, had done real work. I found a seat near the back of the ceremony section, toward the aisle, on the bride's side because I was technically the bride's family, and also because I wanted the option to see the room rather than face front the whole time. Nadira had offered to come with me, and I had told her no. Some things you walk into alone, not because you need to prove you can, but because having a companion changes what you are doing from witnessing to performing. I wanted to witness. The ceremony was beautiful. Janelle looked genuinely happy, which was the thing I had wondered most about in the weeks leading up to this day. I did not know Derek well. What I knew was that he looked at her during the vows the way a man looks when he means it, and that was enough for me to settle something I had been holding. Raymond was in the front row. I could see his profile from where I was sitting. He did not look back. Patricia sat beside him in a pale blue dress that was exactly the dress Patricia would choose for exactly this occasion. She cried at the vows, which surprised me a little, and then did not surprise me. Patricia was a woman who felt things about the things that were hers. That was never the problem. After the ceremony, there was a cocktail hour in the adjacent space, while the main hall was transitioned for the reception. I got a glass of water and found a spot near one of the tall windows that looked out over Peachtree Street, and I watched the room the way I always watch rooms, taking inventory. Victor Chase came through the cocktail hour briefly, doing a quiet check of the room. I saw him before he saw me. He was moving with a particular focused calm of someone who runs large events. The calm that looks like ease, but is actually a constant process of assessment and adjustment. I knew that walk. I had that walk. He did not stop. I did not try to catch his attention. This was not the moment. The moment was coming. I could feel it in the way you feel a room beginning to shift toward its next beat. I finished my water. I followed the other guests into the reception hall. And then I saw my father standing at the entrance to the VIP section. And I waited for October. What I did not do was hesitate. I want you to know that. I had walked this building before. I knew where every table was. I had looked at the floor plan for this event in my head during the ceremony, matching what I knew of the Whitmore standard layout to the scale of this particular guest count, and I had a reasonable picture of where everything would be. The VIP section was roped off, as I expected, near the bridal party table. There were 4 round tables inside the rope, each set for 8, with better linens and better centerpieces, and small place card holders that told me those seats were assigned. I was not heading toward the VIP section. I want to be precise about that. I was heading toward the table chart near the entrance to the hall, which is how you find out where you are seated at a wedding, and the table chart happened to be in the direction of the VIP rope. I was walking with a purpose, and I was not looking at my father. He stepped slightly into my path. Not dramatically, just enough. VIP tables are family, 4 words, and the smirk, and the gesture with 2 fingers toward the general seating. The room did not stop entirely, but the people nearby felt it. I could see it in the slight shift in their postures, that particular social awareness that spreads through a group when something uncomfortable has been said and everyone is calibrating how to respond. The 2 women nearest to us looked at their table numbers very carefully. A man in a burgundy tie suddenly found his drink very interesting. I looked at my father. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have improved the situation, and improving situations was not what I was there for. I was there to see my sister get married and eat a meal and go home. I let 3 full seconds pass with us looking at each other, which is much longer than it sounds when a room is holding its breath. And then I heard footsteps coming from the hallway to my left. Victor Chase walked in from the direction of the event management office, the way he had been walking all day, with that particular focused calm I had clocked earlier. He was 3 steps into the reception hall when he stopped. He looked at my father. He looked at the rope. He looked at me, and he said, "Miss Monroe." Not as a question, as a recognition. He crossed the floor toward me, not quickly, not with any performance, just with the calm of a man moving toward a person he knows. He extended his hand. I shook it. His expression was professional and warm in the way that only comes from genuine familiarity, not from performing courtesy for a room. He said, "I was hoping to catch you before the end of the evening. We have the Harlow documents finalized. Beverly's office confirmed this morning." I said, "I heard from her Thursday. Congratulations on getting it across the line." He said, "Same to you." He paused and then looked briefly at my father and then back at me. "Can I get your team to seat you at a good table? I want to make sure you're comfortable tonight." I said, "I have a seat. Thank you, Victor." He nodded. He said something else about following up next week on logistics, and then he moved back toward the hallway, the way a person moves when they have exactly as much time as the event requires and they are spending it precisely. I turned back to my father. Raymond Dupree was standing with his hand still half raised from the gesture he had made with 2 fingers, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. It was not embarrassment exactly, because men like Raymond do not show embarrassment cleanly. It was something more like recalibration, the expression of someone who has just learned that the map they were using was for a different territory than the one they were standing in. The 2 women near us had stopped looking at their table numbers. I said, to no one in particular, "I'll find my seat." And I walked into the room. I need to tell you what that moment was and what it was not, because I think it is easy to hear a story like that and land on the wrong understanding of it. What Victor Chase did was not a rescue. I want to be clear about that. I was not in distress. I was standing in a beautiful room in a green dress with my feet firmly on the floor. And if Victor had not appeared, I would have walked to my table and eaten my dinner and gone home and processed the thing with Nadira on Sunday morning over coffee. I did not need to be rescued. What happened was not rescue. What happened was recognition. And there is a difference that matters. Victor knew my name because I had earned the right for him to know it. Over 4 months of due diligence on the Harlow acquisition, I had sat across tables from Victor Chase and his colleagues and shown them the work. I had shown them my financial documentation, my track record, my existing partnerships, my event history, and the business plan I had built for what I intended to do with a partial ownership stake in the Harlow. I had answered questions precisely. I had not oversold. I had shown up to every meeting prepared, and every meeting before it, too. The moment in the hallway was the result of that. It was not a gift. It was not luck. It was not Victor being gallant. It was 4 months of work stepping into the room at the right second and making itself visible. I will tell you what I thought about while I walked to my table, which was table 9, a round table near the east window with 7 other guests I did not know, all of whom had watched the scene by the rope from across the room, and none of whom said anything to me about it, which was the correct choice. I thought about a version of myself from 10 years ago, 24 years old and 2 years into my first hospitality job, sitting in a conference room while someone explained to her that the senior account lead role she was ready for was going to someone else. Someone with a little more seasoning, and how she had nodded and gone back to her desk and spent the next 2 years doing the work that someone with more seasoning should have been doing. And then she had left and built her own thing. I thought about that woman, and I thought about this one, and the thing that connected them was the work. The constant, methodical, show-up prepared work. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's necessary, and then it speaks very clearly. My father had gestured me toward the general seating with 2 fingers. Victor Chase had crossed a room to shake my hand. I want you to understand that I did not make that happen. I did not plan it. I did not know he would be in that hallway. What I had done was build something real, over years. And reality has a way of making itself apparent in the most convenient moments. At table 9, a woman named Bridget, who I gathered was a college friend of Janelle's, leaned toward me and said quietly, "I don't want to be nosy, but that man knew you." I said, "We worked together." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her menu. I picked up my water glass. Across the room, at the VIP section, I could see Raymond seated at his table. Patricia was to his left. His posture had changed. He was holding his shoulders differently, a slight forward curve that I recognized as a man who is aware that something happened that he did not account for and is trying to decide how to file it. I felt something that was not satisfaction and was not sympathy. What I felt was clarity. A clean, still kind of clarity, the kind you get when something you have known quietly for a long time becomes undeniable out loud. I picked up the menu. The salmon looked good. I ordered the salmon. The speeches were good. Derek's best man told a story about a camping trip that went badly in 3 different ways, and somehow became a case for why Derek and Janelle were right for each other. Janelle's maid of honor cried through most of her speech, in the way that is endearing when it is genuine, and this appeared to be genuine. The food was what you expect from a venue like the Whitmore, which is to say, it was very good, and the service was seamless, and whoever was managing the kitchen was running it right. I ate my salmon. I talked to Bridget and to the man across from me, who turned out to work in commercial real estate, and had questions about event venue economics that I was happy to answer, because I find those conversations easy, and because talking about work has always been more comfortable to me than talking about most other things. By the 3rd course, I had covered the basics of how venue partnerships work and what the difference is between a buyout and a partial acquisition, and why the Harlow was an interesting opportunity in the current market. I did not mention which property I was acquiring. He did not ask for specifics, and I did not offer them. The dancing started at 9. I do not love dancing at events where I am not the coordinator, because I have spent too many years watching what happens on a dance floor from a management perspective, and it changes the experience. I stayed at my table and talked to Bridget about her work, which was occupational therapy, and about Atlanta neighborhoods, and about where to find good brunch, which is a topic Atlanta people can discuss indefinitely. At 9:45, Janelle found me. She came across the room alone, without Derek, which told me she had made a decision about this and wanted to do it herself. She was still in her dress, but she had taken her veil off and let her hair down, the way brides do when the official part is over and the party has begun. She looked happy, in the uncomplicated way that a person looks after the thing they planned for actually happened the way they hoped. She sat down in the empty chair next to me. She said, "You came." I said, "You asked." She was quiet for a moment. The music was loud enough that we were in our own small bubble of sound. She said, "I saw what happened, by the rope." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She was 28 years old, and she had grown up in a house where I was managed as a complication, and she was sitting in her wedding dress apologizing to me, and the apology was real. I could tell it was real because it was short. Performed apologies are long. They have a lot of language in them to make the apologizer feel witnessed. Janelle just said the two words and looked at me and waited. I said, "You didn't do it." She said, "I know, but it's my wedding, and you're my sister." She said that last word with a steadiness that surprised me. Not half-sister, just sister. Like she had decided something and was saying it plainly. I said, "Your dress is beautiful." She laughed, the sudden laugh of someone who needed to laugh. She said, "It took me 4 months to find it." We talked for 10 minutes, not about Raymond, not about any of it. We talked about her and Derek's honeymoon plans and about her new apartment in Decatur, and about a restaurant she recommended near her neighborhood that I wrote down in my phone. When she stood up to go back to the dance floor, she put her hand on my arm, briefly, the way you do when words are not quite sufficient and you want to make contact anyway. She said, "Come to dinner sometime, after we're back." I said, "I will." She went back to her husband, and I watched her go. And I sat for a minute, with the particular feeling of something being put down and picked up at the same time. Not a resolution, not a reunion. Just a door, slightly more open than it had been before. I left at 10:15. I did not say goodbye to Raymond. Sunday morning I made coffee at 6 and sat at my kitchen table with the contract Beverly had sent over Friday afternoon, going through it one more time the way I always go through things one more time. Not because I expected to find an error. Beverly Okafor is not someone who sends documents with errors. I went through it because I am the kind of person who needs to read her own name in a document before she signs it, to make it real in the right way. Celeste Monroe, Monroe Hospitality Partners, LLC. Partial acquisition of the Harlow Event Center. I made a note on 2 non-material points, not to change anything, but because I wanted it on the record that I had read it carefully. That is a habit I developed in my 2nd year of business and have not broken. Beverly called at 8:30, which was early for her, which told me she was ready to close. She said, "Any concerns from the weekend review?" I said, 2 notes, minor. I'll send them over. Otherwise, we're good." She said, "We can sign Tuesday." I said, "Tuesday works." After I got off the phone, I sat for another minute. The morning light was doing what it does in October in Atlanta, coming in sideways and making everything look more considered than it is. I thought about the Harlow. I had walked through it twice during due diligence, and I had a clear picture of what I wanted to do with it. There was a long neglected outdoor courtyard that I planned to open for events, and a kitchen that needed updating, and a sound system that was installed in 2014 and had not been touched since. All of it was fixable. All of it was just work. Nadira came over at 10 with pastries and the particular energy of a woman who had heard nothing and was prepared to hear everything. I told her all of it. The rope, the smirk, Victor coming down the hallway, what he said, my father's face, Janelle sitting down beside me in her wedding dress. Nadira listened without interrupting, which she is very good at. And when I finished, she said, "Okay, 3 things." I said, "Go." She said, "First, you handled it exactly right. Second, that manager is going to remember that moment for a long time, and that is a good thing for you professionally. Third, Janelle saying sister unprompted is actually significant, and I want you to not minimize it. I said, I'm not minimizing it. She said, you said it in the same tone you used to describe the salmon. I laughed. She was right. I had a tendency to neutralize things I did not yet know how to hold. I said, she asked me to dinner. Nadira said, are you going to go? I said, I think so, not right away, but yes. At 11:47 that morning, Raymond texted me. The message said, I hope you enjoyed the evening. It would have been good to have more time to catch up. Family is important. I read it twice. I set my phone down on the table. I did not reply. Not because I was punishing him, but because I had looked at what he sent and found that I had nothing true to say in return. And I have a rule about sending things that are not true. Nadira saw my face and said, him? I said, him. She said, are you going to answer? I said, not today. She nodded. She picked up her pastry. Outside my window, the October light was still doing its sideways thing, making everything look considered. The contract was on my table. The Harlow was waiting. I picked up my coffee and I went back to the document. 2 weeks after Janelle's wedding, on a Tuesday morning, I signed the Harlow acquisition papers in Beverly Okafor's office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta, with Beverly across the desk from me and her assistant taking notes in the corner, and the city visible through the window behind Beverly's shoulder. The sprawl of it, the particular Atlanta mix of trees and towers that I have loved since the day I arrived here 12 years ago, with everything I owned in my car, and a contact list, and no idea that 12 years later, I would be in this office signing these papers. Beverly handed me the pen. I signed. We shook hands. She said, congratulations, Celeste. I said, thank you for getting us here. She said, you got yourself here. I just did the paperwork. That was generous of her, and also mostly true. I drove home slowly, taking surface streets instead of the highway the way I do when I want to think rather than arrive. Atlanta on a Tuesday morning is a particular kind of city. Busy, but not frantic. People doing their ordinary Tuesday things with the efficiency of a city that has decided to take itself seriously. I passed a coffee shop I like near Ponce City Market and made a note to go back that weekend. I passed the street where my first office was, a small suite in a building that no longer exists, and I felt something that was not nostalgia exactly, just acknowledgement. That was where it started. This is where it is now. At home, I put the signed copy of the contract on my kitchen table, and I stood in my kitchen and I thought about the wedding. I want to tell you what I have been thinking about since that Saturday in October, because it is the thing this whole story is actually about, and I have been getting to it carefully. My father stood at the entrance to a VIP section and gestured me toward the back with 2 fingers. He has been doing some version of that my entire life, not always in those exact words, not always with that gesture, but always with the same message. You are adjacent to what matters here, not central to it. You are a side element. You are the footnote. What I have been thinking about is not the smirk. I have thought about the smirk enough. What I have been thinking about is how it felt to walk into that room. I walked in knowing what I knew. I walked in with 6 years of work behind me and a deal in progress, and a name that meant something in my industry. I walked in prepared, which is the thing I have always done, and which has always been, in some ways, my response to a world that has not always been prepared to see me. I walked in with my dress right, and my head up, and my feet on the floor. And when Victor Chase came down the hallway and said my name, the thing I felt was not triumph. I want to be precise about that. People want the triumph. They want the moment of glory. What I felt was something quieter, something like confirmation. The confirmation that the work you do in private does not stay private forever. That it shows up. That it accumulates. that it speaks, eventually, in rooms where someone was counting on your silence. I have not replied to Raymond's text. I have thought about it. I am not certain what, if anything, I want to say to him. And until I am certain, I will say nothing. That is not anger. Anger has heat in it. What I have is more like a door, mostly closed, not locked. Whether it opens further will depend on things that have not happened yet. I had dinner with Janelle 3 weeks after the wedding. We went to the restaurant she recommended near her apartment in Decatur, and we talked for 2 hours about her new marriage and her work, and my work, and Atlanta, and food, and nothing heavy. She did not bring up Raymond. I did not bring up Raymond. We talked about each other, which was, if I am honest, the first time we had ever really done that. She is a person I would like to know better. That is something. Beverly sent me a follow-up email about the Harlow transition timeline. Victor's team is ready to begin the handoff process at the end of the month. I have a meeting scheduled with my project manager and Jerome Banks, who I brought in as a logistics consultant for the renovation, and we will walk the Harlow property together and make a plan. I am going to stand in that courtyard and look at what it is and what it can be, and I am going to take good notes, and I am going to do the work. That is what I do. I am Celeste Monroe. The Harlow Event Center is partially mine. The Whitmore Grand's manager knows my name. My sister invited me to dinner and I went. My father gestured me toward the back with 2 fingers, and I am going to be absolutely fine. Let me tell you, that is the best feeling there is.